And then I would like to ask Rudi to start.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Welcome to everybody. My name is Rudi Cameron, and Antje and I myself, we have been organizing the series of webinars. I asked Kirsten what she expected me to say about her before we started, and she said, keep it short, and I will keep it short. I'll tell you why I became a member of Zieta. That's quite a number of years ago, but it connects with Kirsten because she, at that time, coordinated the regional group, which Antje and I are now coordinating, and the way she did it convinced me. This was very professional, very fair, and very transparent. And having all those methods available, creating a fair atmosphere among colleagues who essentially are competitors on the market is a very special skill not everybody has. And I very much appreciate that. And I must say, I'm a member of Zieta because of that experience, nothing else. That's all I wanted to say about you, Kirsten. I think that's now your turn.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. And I think I should start now to share my screen. Hope you can see this. Is it working?
Yes.
Good. So I'm supposed to start, Rudi?
Yes, please.
Okay. I think I have to note a disclaimer in the beginning because I saw so many colleagues and I discussed this approach with you many times, and I see many famous names. So I'm afraid there is not really something new. I'm working on it. And this is why I wanted to present it here, because I think I never presented in a theater forum. Why I'm working with cultural reflexivity. And I wanted to also to have the discussion in English to see how this works, maybe worldwide, I don't know. It's a help. It's a help for me, and I hope it's a help for you. Maybe a little bit of the background story. All of you, I think most of you have a long story in intercultural communication, so do I. And kind of like 15 years ago, 15 plus, the academic discourse in Germany about intercultural communication was quite incoherent, I might say. We had the classical cultural contrastive approaches. There was a discussion about diversity, and there were anti-racism theories. And as far as I could see it, okay, I should put this away here. Oh, it doesn't work. Okay. Are you taking care of the waiting room, the both of you?
Yes, we are.
Okay, good, because it's unfortunately, yeah, we can see this here on my screen here. And when at that time I was self-employed, and I, in practice, you know, I took everything that was of use. On the other hand, I really took care, especially in trainings, that there is some kind of coherence. So I didn't just mix psychological knowledge with sociological knowledge. I always wanted to know where does the knowledge come from. And at that time, I read a book from Dirk Becker, Wozu Kultur, Why Culture? And that's why I call it Why Cultural Reflexivity, because the term. I continue. There is an echo, huh? Do I hear this only, or others hear this too?
Oh, I
hear it too.
Yeah. Okay.
But we can mute everybody now, and you will have to unmute yourself, Kirsten.
Okay. Do you hear me?
It's perfect.
Okay, good. When I was in practice, I just simply took everything that I could use. And I remember when I started to present the idea of cultural reflexivity, at some conferences, one of the participants came to me and she said, oh, it's such a relief to hear how you're working, because I'm working in a kindergarten and we wanted an intercultural training, and they said, oh, how can you do that? It's all about intercultural opening, it's about anti-racism, it's not about culture. So there were these, I think 10 years ago plus, there were these, I wouldn't call it fights, but these kind of, you can mix it in a way. So yeah, I would like to give you a brief overview. That was the history kind of, it was of practical use. Can you see this here? Yeah. I would like to share, as announced and promised, a critical incident. It's a real case, alienated from a student of mine. I would like to discuss the cultural reflexive analysis, how I do it, and I just told the moderators, you can interrupt me anytime in the middle of the sentence. I don't mind. Sometimes I get more ideas what I could, share from my thoughts. Then there will be a summary and of course a discussion and some transfer if you like. And the picture of the kaleidoscope is a really helpful metaphor for me because as you know, kaleidoscopes, they consist of a limited sum of glass stones, colored glass stones, and once you twist them, you get a pattern. And when you twist again, you get a different structure. And this is the idea of, in a metaphorical way, of cultural reflexivity. Okay, let's start with the critical incident. Recently, the Dabandis, a general practitioner with his family from Iran, moved to a block of flats, and on the same floor where Mr. and Mrs. Smith have been living for 25 years in their hometown. Mr. Smith is the maintenance man in the house. You also live in the block, but on a different floor. In a small talk on the stairs, Mrs. Smith complains to you about the shoes in front of the door, the noise, also some strange sound at times, and the many visitors of the new neighbors. She assumes that Muslim behavior doesn't fit into the house community. What could you do or say? This is how I usually put the critical incidents when I hear of one, because in everyday practice, we don't have like 25 minutes time to analyze it. So we have to react quite immediately. Now, how do I look at this situation? First twist. And I call it the quasi-natural worldview, coming from Schütz, or with Goffman, I would say primary frames. Usually we take our knowledge for granted. We just interpret the meaning of what people say. We know that there are different habits and values. I think this is the most common approach. And when I developed this approach, I call it intercultural perspective. And I think what is interesting now is that I really don't differentiate between categories of second order, like drawn from studies, intercultural studies, or from science, and experiences. Because what we do is we apply this knowledge, we interpret. And although they are scientific constructions, they're already in everyday language. Sometimes we hear, oh, he's quite an indirect type, or yeah, maybe this is because they are Muslim. There is some kind of knowledge in the air, I would say, with the success of intercultural communication. So when we look from that perspective, strangeness is something that there is a misunderstanding, something that is not familiar or not habitualized to us. The notion of culture that we use is closed. It's a group of people, it's a nation, it's a region, it's the the native Hindi speakers, it's the software of the mind, mentalities. We kind of have the idea that people belong to a group, and this is how we primarily look at it. We anticipate that there might be misunderstandings, and we treat culture as a more independent variable. Now, this approach aims at understanding perspectives. I think this is one of the basic goals. To know more about the values, yes, also about the motives, maybe, but especially about the meanings we want to understand. And we use the available knowledge coming from studies, coming from experiences of the respective cultures that we anticipate or inquire about to interpret the situation. And when it comes to intercultural learning, it's always about a change of perspectives. And there is this background of enlightenment idea in a way that understanding and reasoning as the key factor. So if we explain something, people would say, ah, that's why they do this. Okay, now, and that would kind of regulate also the emotions. It's a little bit black and white how I put it, but to have the value of each perspective. Now, if we transfer this to the case, we would say we have the Dabandis and the Smith family. And obviously, the Dabandis are not used to wear shoes inside. And the Smiths are not used to have shoes outside. This is kind of what is mentioned in the critical incident. And there's also mentioned that there is hustle and bustle and many visitors. So maybe there is collective or a family orientation. And on the other hand, the orientation towards smaller gatherings and more silence. Now, I didn't put the category Muslim here because, and this is what the Smiths say, maybe it's Muslim behavior because we don't know. Maybe there is something, it's a different category. What we can tell, and that's why it's on the same level, is that there are different perspectives on the same situation. And there is no better or worse, just different routines and values. This is how we teach intercultural learning, right? Next, twist. Before I come to this final perspective I call systemic constructivist perspective, I would like to talk about multi-collectivity. Now, after decades of discussions in intercultural communication, multi-collectivity is more prominent than it was like 15 years ago. Now, nowadays, we know that there are family cultures, there is an organizational culture, there might be professional cultures, a club, an association has a culture. Languages are connected to culture in a way. So we know that all of us belong to different sub-collectives, how Hansen would put it. And to a certain extent, we can even move in and out of such a collective. Now, the colors of the pie chart here indicate that there might be a different relevance in the situation of these sub-collectives. So as you see, this thought is going away from, okay, this guy is from Iran, and we are from wherever. It's going to, okay, there are so many influential factors that we really do not know what is the influential factor. And also there are changing we's. Now, just imagine there is a group of people, they all in a football club, or some of them, no, this is just a group of people. Some of them are in a football club and some of them are speak English as a second language. So that makes them a collective in a way. However, not a culture. We should differentiate that, but maybe later. So when we have a look from the perspective of multi-collectivity, it's so complex that we hardly know anything. And this is the thought I need to go to systemic constructivist view, because then there is no cause and effect. There is no real reason. There is just interdependencies in the situation. And this is what the systems theory delivers from those of you who work with systems theory. Now, the notion of culture, if there is any, I have to say, because some system theorists think that the culture is of no use in a way, we don't need it. How I put it, it considers several collectives and it looks for the different sources of the confusion that might be the case here. It's not a misunderstanding, it's the systems theory would call it perturbation, it's confusion. And we have to consider many effects, especially situational and organizational effects where the situation takes place, because this is a very relevant system to the actors. And The next point, it requires self-perception and openness. Looks like, okay, we always tell that in intercultural learning. It's not a moral, normative point. It's really pivotal in this context because those of you who work with systems theory and systemic practice know that there is this famous quote of Steve DeShazer who said, whenever you have a hypothesis, take 2 aspirin and wait until the attack is gone. So if I write requires self-perception and openness, it means I forget all that I know. And that's why I work with the art, not I, but everyone in my place would work with the art of Nescience, in German called konstruktives Nichtwissen. And wait for, how Sharma puts it, wait for the knowledge or the solution to emerge in the situation, which is a very special experience when you have it the first time, as far as I remember it. This perspective has a high potential to create commonalities and common interests because you do not look from the perspective of differences. You look from, okay, what is the perspective of solutions here? I don't need to know the reasons. We need a solution that fits for both of us or for all of us. So there is not really the question for the why. And yeah, typical approaches. It's a little bit delicate to put scholars in boxes, and there is always a right or wrong, but I thought if I would choose someone, I would maybe choose Welch, because he's speaking a lot about multi-collectivity, not so much about power and not so much about cultural differences. I would definitely name Pleister 10. She might be not so familiar. I found her in the context of coaching. Because she published in English, I think 2 books meanwhile, how to combine what Ute Clement does in Germany, intercultural knowledge with systemic constructivist approaches to inquire in intercultural coaching where culture could play a role. And I put Vertovich for super diversity. However, he has a notion of power, but I put him here because when I come to the last meta perspective, I would say he's not too deep in this every knowledge is ideology thought. Now, transfer to the example. I just selected 3. There could be many others, countless. What they don't know yet is that they are in the same football club. I thought I'd put a commonality here. And the angles, not the degree, but the angles play a role here because there are functional roles that have more weight in the organizational culture. We don't know if there is a Hausordnung or some rules of the house, but definitely Mr. Smith is the maintenance man and Mrs. Smith is his wife. So there might be a little bit of a, more weight to his words in a way. And the new neighbors are just tenants like all the others. And they are lower in seniority in the house. Seniority in a system is also an influential factor. If you live there for 25 years, people listen to you differently, whatever differently means here. What I don't mean with these asymmetries you see here is the macro power system. It's just the functional roles in the system here. It's not speech positions, it's just roles. Last twist, power reflexive practice. Now I call this practice because you always work in discourses from that point of view. The notion of culture is more cohesive, difference-oriented, very diversity-oriented. And when you kind of have a look at this, at these theories or at these approaches for intercultural learning, then culture is more an ideology. It's an arena of power fights. And we should be aware of this. So whenever we speak about what is normal, in a culture, they would say normal is the dominance, it's heteronormativity, or it's white supremacy, something like that. So we have a look at, from that perspective, inequality aspects, like any diversity factor, like race, age, physical abilities, and so forth, but also educational differences, maybe the image of the religion or the dominance of the religion, the immigrant status, the parental status, and so forth. Especially it looks for power and the asymmetrical power of the macro influences. So like gender is a macro influence. It's being a woman can have a different cultural factor from the intercultural perspective, from the first perspective in, I don't know, Iran and Germany, but definitely there is a hierarchy worldwide between male and women. I think no one would deny that. And I put interfering factors in brackets. I hope I did that. Yeah, interfering factors, because from the dominant position, it's not interfering, it's just helpful because you have more privileges. So the view is on the pre-distributed privileges here. They create the chances for participation and for justice. So it has a political dimension. And whenever I speak, whatever I say, whatever category I use, I have to reflect the premises, what is in this category, and how can I reduce domination. I just experience that every day at the moment because I have a blind student. Now I kind of, when I speak, I cannot say, oh, you have a look at the slide, please. I would exclude her immediately. So I'm trying to train myself I say, okay, on the slide we see, and I read this so that we are on the same page, you know, but I read this for Fatwa. No, I don't read it for Fatwa. I read it for all of us. So this is how it's done, and that's why I call it a practice. Yeah, full stop. From that perspective, it's about inclusion and exclusion. It's not about misunderstandings, it's not about perturbation, it's about including and excluding. And the typical approaches, intersectionality, definitely, critical intercultural communication, social justice approaches like Searle's. And I'm always grateful, Antje always has wonderful impulses for me, because she discovered Renita Wong. She's coming from a mindfulness approach. However, she has a strong power theory. How does she call it? Every epistemic step is a powerful step, something like that, I quote. So knowing through discomfort, I could have put her in the second perspective as well, because she tries to work with the nescience as well, but her theory is based on ideology, critical theories, I would say. Now, if we look at the situation from that angle, we find a member of the dominant culture, the dominant local culture, Germany here, and a person with a migrant background. There might be a person of color that is not mentioned in the critical incident, and a white person, maybe, a native speaker, a non-native speaker. And I thought, oh, how about the religion? They're both Christians, as we learned. And we have a different angle now, because it's inverted. The maintenance man, Mr. Smith, considering the image that a maintenance man has compared to a family doctor, is lower, I would say, especially in Germany, I could say. So these are some of the selected identities, or how this approach would put it, speech positions, because every speech position has resources I put here. To sum it up, There are always just 3 questions we can ask to a situation. First question is, what are the cultural or intercultural meanings here? Which cultural play a role? Do I have interpretations for that? The second, what are the interdependencies here, especially in the situation and system where the critical incident takes place? And we shouldn't forget that these are all constructions. So why don't we just look for solutions? And the third, I look for justice. What are the privileges, the diversity factors, the collective experiences maybe that are pre-distributed in the given situation and need to be considered. These are all together, all categories together, and this is still just a selection. And what is not in this chart is the interdependencies. So it's rather confusing, and I like that, because when I'm confused, I think I'm going to learn, and I'm open enough to find a solution with the others and not to know. But it's interesting to have all the identities, or some of the identities that could play a role here. I already mentioned it. I'm just picking out, I provide you with some tables where I kind of try to ask myself, what does that mean for competence? What does that mean for identities? What does that mean for, and so forth? And I think I already mentioned it, that in the first perspective, we work with assumptions, and that's why what is not familiar is unknown, and we usually experience misunderstandings working with Nesson, because it's a knowledge-based approach. And from a systemic perspective, we say, what is contingent? It doesn't fit into the system and the patterns of the system, so we have a perturbation. And in the third, the order of the perspectives, by the way, doesn't play any role. You can start either way. It's just for the sake of the presentation. And intercultural communication from the third perspective is ideology, and it's all about inclusion, exclusion, participation. Before I come to the end, I would like to point out a few other things. Now, my own interactive action is, I use knowledge, I know. I anticipate that there is a co-construction. I or we create something together. And I anticipate pre-distributed privileges. I deconstruct. This is what I have to do in the situations. And we don't have 20 minutes time to think about it. We need methods for it. So that's why, what are the methods? Okay, applying knowledge is one, but I can also forget the knowledge, and I can just ask open questions or do nothing, just wait if something emerges. Or I could address the social capital that is in the room and work on, as if I am in the dominant position, work on how can we be on eye level. For example, when someone would say, oh, you're the lucky one here because you had the opportunity to go to university. It's not in my position to say, but that doesn't matter. Of course, I would kind of, reinforce the asymmetry. It's true. I was lucky. Of course, I did a lot for it, but I was also lucky to go for it. So this is just a kind of a verbal example for it. And of course, all these approaches have strengths and limits. I just point out the green ones here. Definitely the first perspective appreciates cultural factors and overestimates it or them at times. The second perspective multiplies the approaches and solutions, but has no lens for power differences, definitely not. And sometimes it depends on how the scholars and how the practitioners combine it with intercultural communication. Knowledge has a lack of cultural expertise. I remember the times, and you might too, that 12 to 15 years ago, that system theorists said, we don't need culture. We just system theorists, and we can use our knowledge everywhere. And then they notice it's not that easy in therapy and coaching. Maybe from a theoretical point, it's easy, but when you have to deal with a client or a patient, some intercultural knowledge might be very helpful. And the power reflexive practice is very fundamentally oriented, definitely. It goes for ethics, for a better world. And I might have a very limited individual influence. So that's definitely a limit. Now, why cultural reflexivity? Last slide. For me, it's helpful because it's I can reflect and I can modify when I use knowledge in a situation. That's the practical side for me. What knowledge am I using at the moment? Kind of can be aware of it. Theoretically, I find it interesting to look for what is the epistemology of the theorist who is writing. Because I kind of, when I take this approach, I kind of buy something with it. What I like is that there is no best way. There are benefits and limits to all of the approaches, and maybe I only picked 3. There are scholars who work with 5 or 7. I would find this very confusing. These 3 are quite work me. And when I use this kaleidoscope twist, there is no right or wrong when it comes to a solution or to answers to a critical incident. There are just consequences that that might follow. And I like that I am very more aware than I was maybe 15 years ago of my speech positions, of my social identities, of how I feel, the introspection part. And for me, it's very helpful to open up my mind to go for creative solutions and for negotiating culture, for negotiating what is the world we want to live in, the both of us or all of us who are here now, including the ethical perspective. So my question and opening the discussion for you is that helpful? What should be further developed? I can also tell what I'm doing research on at the moment. And of course, any remark, question, or argument is very welcome. And thank you very much for listening.